It's my pleasure to introduce our next guest from Arranta Bio, Chief Executive Officer Mark Vanforth. As a reminder to attendees, if you'd like to ask a question of our speaker, please type it into the question box under the video player. Mark, welcome. Could you provide a couple of minutes of introductory comments about your company for investors new to the story?
Sure. Thanks, Kay, and thanks for the opportunity to be with you today. Really appreciate how well you guys have adapted to these virtual online conferences. Arranta Bio was set up in 2019 specifically to help microbiome pioneers. So we are a contract manufacturer, a pure play contract manufacturer, i.e. none of our own products in development. And really my interest in this space dates back about 5 or 6 years, recognizing that there were supply challenges and really seeing an opportunity to help the industry to realize the full potential. And I think this is a very exciting area of development of products that can make a major impact on healthcare. And so that was really the impetus. And we started by acquiring a small company that had been active in this space for about a decade and worked on many different bacteria, and had a lot of experience of actually being able to demonstrate that they could take these difficult to grow bacteria and successfully grow them and keep them viable for clients.
So, one of the recent news items was the announced acquisition of your company by Recipharma. And how might this possibly change the focus on microbiome manufacturing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, I mentioned when we started Arranta Bio, and we were not looking to sell the company. We've grown to about 170 people by the end of last year, serving quite a number of different clients. And we were happy growing the business and not really expecting to start any kind of sales process for some considerable time. So Recipharma approached us out of the blue, and the first answer, of course, was we're not looking to sell. But then they explained what their vision was, which really is that they want to become a leading player in the area of advanced therapies. But one of my first questions was the one that you just asked, which is, well, but what about the microbiome? What do you know about this space? And I was really impressed to understand that the person leading that company, Mark Funk, he was the COO at Lonza when he put in place a joint venture between Lonza and one of the leading companies involved in probiotics and other bacterial work. So he really gets this space. He was an early pioneer himself in establishing services for it, and probably is the most qualified person in the world that I could have thought of engaging with for the future for Arranta. So the answer is, it means that we're going to continue our investment in our growth to support microbiome companies. We're already working with some late stage companies, getting ready for their commercial needs. And we expect that process will now accelerate with the added capabilities to help grow a business that will get from being a part of Recipharm.
Great. So as a firm at Chardon, we've had a long-standing interest in the manufacturing challenges represented by gene therapy and cell therapy. So you have that expertise as well. How do the challenges associated with an emerging space like microbiome, the manufacturing of these products, compare to those for gene therapy manufacturing?
Well, I think with gene therapy, there have been a number of different ways to manufacture products, so some complexities around that. What's interesting with manufacturing bacteria is people who are not familiar with this space might think, well, that's what we've been doing for millennia. So surely we've kind of figured all of that out. The answer is it's not quite so simple. So the first challenge is that many of these products are anaerobic. So you have to exclude oxygen, otherwise the bacteria won't survive. And so the first challenge is getting the right conditions for growth. And what we've done is invested heavily in single-use technology. And again, I think part of the industry assumption was that single-use wouldn't be as good for these bacteria, but we've been able to show that you can grow bacteria anaerobic and aerobic bacteria in single-use technology, which creates great flexibility. So then there really are two key components of successful manufacturing. The first is to achieve a yield that's going to give sufficient product for the purposes intended. And so we have developed a number of different proprietary media that give high yield, and we're able to grow bacteria that some others, frankly, were prepared to give up on because they didn't think that you could grow them. And then the second is, having achieved the yield, is maintaining the viability of the product. And of course, that's what is distinct about most microbiome products. They're actually live bacteria. So unlike much of our industry where we break cells open in order to release and then purify a protein or an enzyme, here you're actually keeping the bacteria whole, but putting them into a dormant state through a drying technology typically. And so the expertise of being able to dry the bacteria, but then maintain the viability of them so that when they're delivered into the gut, in most cases, they will actually rejuvenate at that point and colonize at the right place in the gut. So those are really the two key things, is being able to grow the bacteria, get the yields required, and then being able to maintain their viability for delivery to the intended location.
So yeah, let's start with the single use. Again, what we're looking at here also is, very strict needs to isolate, have separation. So the single use certainly would play into that. And, at this point, how well, at least qualitatively and maybe even quantitatively, can you say that you can effectively manufacture anaerobic products?
So most product demand can be satisfied in the clinical stage with relatively small bioreactors, 50 liter, 250, 500 liter. And we've done numerous runs at those scales, especially if there's a consortia involved where there may be fermentation of individual bacteria. So perhaps 6 are going into a product, and those are historically done as 6 separate fermentations. So again, relatively small scales have been sufficient for that, but there are products that, as they approach market, are going to require larger volumes. So we recently, 2 months ago, conducted a trial in partnership with Thermo Fisher, showing that we could successfully grow bacteria up at 5,000 liter scale using single-use technology. So I believe that this is the first time that that has been demonstrated. And of course, that opens the door to scaling up rather than scaling out for greater efficiency. And that's really for anaerobic products that can be grown in a single-use bioreactor. For an aerobic product, especially an engineered one, for example, that might be an E. coli, these require fermenters. And again, there are fermenters available that can go up to several thousand liter scale. So we really have the ability now to grow bacteria with the flexibility of single use.
Okay, and then the other point you brought up, the need to have these things later be reconstituted if they're an orally administered product. So, this need for the lyophilization, what techniques or processes are you adopting to improve quality and yield of these types of products?
Well, so there are 2 elements to that. The first is really the cryopreservative, the materials that are used along with the bacteria in order to put them into that dormant state and maintain their viability. And again, the company that we acquired back in 2019 and that we've continued to invest as part of Arranta has worked on many different cryopreservatives in order to show that we can maintain that high viability. So as one aspect is the cryopreservative is key. And then there's the drying technique itself. So lyophilization has been pretty standard in the industry and it's effective. However, it's very much a batch process today. It's quite time consuming. It can take 4 or 5 days or sometimes even longer to dry the bacteria to the condition that's required for stability for storage. And so we are currently investigating other techniques and showing success with these, including spray drying, but also some other proprietary drying technologies that we're working on now that we'll be able to make available to clients. This can be especially important with higher volume products, where doing that by traditional lyophilization would just be very, very challenging with regard to the amount of capacity needed.
Okay, and then for these orally delivered products, where they're released in the gut is important. We were just talking about that in the last session. So on the delivery end, what are you doing to improve the release kinetics of either capsules or coated tablets?
Yep. So clearly the decision, the analysis about where they need to be released is done by the product innovators themselves. But we then work with them on their capsule selection, looking at the pH adjustment for the capsules, which will affect the release point in the gut, looking at the thickness and coating of those capsules, again, to look at the duration, so that we have the bacteria released at the optimal point. But as you alluded to there, we are also working on other technologies, such as tableting, which again has historically been thought of as not a viable way of delivering live bacteria. But we're actually having success in demonstrating that this is a viable option for a number of different bacteria. So that's certainly a technology we'll expect to be used more in the future. We're also seeing some companies are actually looking to sterile fill their bacteria, and that's a technology that we're installing this year, which would allow us to do that. So I said sterile, of course, it's aseptic. You don't want it to be sterile, otherwise the live bacteria would no longer be live. So an aseptic technique for filling is part of the delivery.
Okay, and then maybe finishing this off, release assays are critical for cell and gene therapies. What are you doing to improve the quality and accuracy of the release assays you're using for your microbiome products?
Yeah, we spend a great deal of time working on the analytical side of this. We're using many of the standard techniques, 16S, et cetera, that are used in the industry. But we've also been investing in new technologies. For example, we're now able to take a consortia of bacteria and analyze that consortia to show the relevant proportions of each bacteria that is in there. So investment in analytics is critical for good process control and for product release.
Okay. So, beyond some of these technical issues, let's kind of go back to the top. Earlier stage companies will typically choose to use a CDMO if capital constrained. Why else should they consider working with a CDMO?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jay. And certainly capital constrained is a good reason, but even when companies have sufficient source of capital to make buy decision, what's worth considering in working with a CDMO is the experience that the CDMO has, their knowledge from working across multiple programs and with multiple companies. So an innovator can gain from that CDMO's experience that they've developed elsewhere. For example, we're dealing with multiple programs, and so we're gaining experience across multiple programs, versus an innovator choosing to develop all of the infrastructure, all of the quality system required for commercial product, for licensure, and all of the other functions that are required, from supply chain management through manufacturing, technical support, etc. So by coming to a CDMO, an innovator can tap into these areas of deep expertise without having to invest not just in physical infrastructure, but in organizational capability to support their product getting to market. And then they can invest their money in additional programs, which we would all like to see.
Sure. So how do companies protect their intellectual property and under that term, more the trade secrets when working with a CDMO?
Yeah, it's a very important question, and one of the areas we take very, very seriously. The first thing I would say is that what is known and owned by the innovator continues to be known and owned by them. We need certain amounts of that knowledge to ensure that we can deliver their product. Our approach is we have know-how and we have proprietary information, and we're happy to incorporate that into our clients' programs in order to maximize their chances of success. We're very used to handling confidential information. It's a standard piece of our business to firewall different projects and ensure that there cannot be any leakage or misuse of confidential information of the client. And then again, to ensure that the client's programs will benefit from all of the know-how that we've gained over the years.
Okay. So, coming out of 2020, it was really a strong year for the sector. And then we rolled into 2021. There were some high-profile clinical failures, and certainly the publicly traded stocks suffered because of that. So when you were with us a year ago, you had talked about seeing a strong interest in customer demand, especially from a lot of companies that were still in stealth mode in early 2021 relative to 2020. Now 1 year after that, again, coming out of a down year in terms of at least the performance of the publicly traded stocks, what are you seeing now from your perspective in terms of customer demand, and how does that compare to a year ago at this time?
Yeah, there's no question that last summer there were some disappointing results that clearly caused some investors to step back. I think especially those that perhaps were looking to jump into this area, seeing it as the next hot area for development, and it made some of them hesitate. So in the summer last year, we definitely were hearing from our clients and some of our prospective clients that access to funding was becoming a challenge. What we saw towards the end of the year, however, was really a reversal of that and a pickup in interest. There's no doubt there are some programs that are hard to fund, especially those that are going against more popular targets, where there are already several companies that are advanced in those spaces. Those programs, companies are typically finding hard to fund. But there are so many companies going into new areas, looking at neurological diseases, for example, looking at cancer, immune system interactions, that there continues now to be a steady source of funding for those companies. And we've seen a strong pickup from Q4 that's continuing now into this year, with companies being able to obtain the funding, especially for innovative programs and coming forward looking for services.
So again, beyond oncology, what other areas that the companies are focused on, would you say are increasing?
Yeah, I think we are seeing broad interest, really companies looking at chronic diseases where there are potentially large patient populations, where those diseases have an association with dysbiosis. And this does range from inflammatory and metabolic diseases to now neurological, cardiovascular, respiratory diseases. A number of companies focusing on the gut-brain axis as well as the gut-liver axis. So I think somebody said it a couple of years ago that we perhaps only know 10% about what's happening in the microbiome, and I think we're still in a high discovery mode, where we continue to see some really intriguing data coming through from these different studies.
Okay, so from your intimate involvement with the microbiome space, what do you think that the market or investors are missing most about the space in general?
I think I would break investors into two groups. There's those that are the believers who've already been involved in this space, maybe for 5 years or more. And whilst they're seeing some of the challenges that occur in any new area, they're willing to continue to be supportive. Some of the newer investors perhaps are a bit skittish until they see further evidence of a couple of things. One is products getting approved, and it's great to say that we're that much closer to seeing the first product approved, with the expectation from Series that they would file the middle of this year for FDA approval, as well as some other activities getting close to commercial elsewhere in the world. So that's fantastic. But I think the other things that perhaps are not fully understood is that we now are seeing the technologies that will allow us to scale these products and ensure that there's a cost-effective supply that delivers products that are at a therapeutic quality and can really impact some of these chronic diseases.
And you mentioned scale, and it's always very difficult without knowing pricing, what cost of goods sold and ultimately gross margins can be on these types of products. But I guess at least qualitatively, where do you think they can get to?
I think that the cost of goods are likely not to be a barrier to the use of these products. Again, it's very hard to generalize because you really need to look at its very specific examples. One of the interesting facets we have here is we have probiotics, which are somewhat similar products, but they're not designed and they're not manufactured to the same quality. They don't have the same stability in general that you would need to have for a therapeutic product. And some of those products basically are relatively low priced because they're not delivering the clinical effect. So there's no question that cost of goods will be higher than can be achieved for a non-therapeutic probiotic. But I still don't think that that's going to be a barrier to effective delivery of these treatments at prices that make sense in the market.
So you touched on this a little bit, but as we look forward over the next 12 to 24 months, beyond the potential approval of the first microbiome medicine, what other specific events do you think could occur that could serve as catalysts to re-energize investor interest in the microbiome medicine space?
I think investors always get excited by data. So showing, especially later stage data, that these products are working, that we're able to link, show the causation by delivering these products, that it's making a difference to patients' health. That's what will drive skeptics away and drive funding in to continue to grow this sector. So it's all about data and getting solid clinical data, especially in later stage trials.
Okay, well, we reached the end of our time here. I really want to thank you for joining us, and have a good rest of your day.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Great, thanks.